There are moments in history when heaven is silent and moments when heaven moves. And then there are moments when the move has already been decided. This is not a warning about what times happen. This is an announcement of what times has already been set in motion. Asterisk. December 27th, 2025 is not just another date on the calendar. It is a crossing point, a threshold, a dividing line between what was and what will be. Because in the ancient ways of God, a house is never just a house. A house is identity. A house is authority. A house is destiny. When God moves a person, he does not begin with the feet, he begins with the decree. Before Israel ever crossed the Jordan, the land was already theirs. Before the walls of Jericho fell, the victory had already been spoken. Before the exiles returned, the house had already been promised. And so it is now. There are those who have been living in places they were never meant to stay, spiritually, emotionally, even physically. Places of delay, places of limitation, places that once served a purpose but can no longer contain what God is about to release. You thought the shaking was an attack, but the shaking was an eviction notice. You thought the discomfort meant loss, but the discomfort meant transition. Because God never upgrades a life without first unsettling the old foundation. In Scripture, every major move of God involved a house. Abraham was called out of one house to become a house. David was taken from obscurity to establish a house. Solomon built a house where glory descended. And when the people returned from exile, the command was simple: rebuild the house. Why? Because when the house changes, the season changes. December 27th, 2025 marks the end of wandering and the beginning of possession. Not because of striving, not because of effort, but because the time has come. There are doors you didn't open because they were never meant to be opened by you. They were waiting for the appointed time. And now the time has arrived. This is not just about walls and rooms. This is about inheritance. A new house means a new mantle. A new house means a new level of responsibility. A new house means new battles, but also new authority. When Israel entered the promised land, they didn't enter empty ground. They entered territory prepared in advance. Vineyards they did not plant. Cities they did not build. Wells they did not dig. And that is the pattern. What is coming is not something you must manufacture. It is something you must receive. But hear this carefully. You cannot carry yesterday's mindset into tomorrow's house. The old fears cannot live there. The old compromises cannot remain. The old identities cannot cross the threshold. Every house of destiny requires a leaving behind. That is why some relationships are shifting. That is why certain doors are closing without explanation. That is why the familiar feels distant. It is not rejection. It is alignment. Because heaven does not move randomly. Heaven moves precisely. And when the move is decided, delay is no longer an option. Some are waiting for confirmation, but the confirmation has already happened. The stirring in your spirit is the signal. December 27th, 2025 is not the beginning of striving, it is the beginning of settling. Settling into purpose, settling into calling, settling into what was prepared long before you arrived. You are not stepping into something fragile. You are stepping into something established. The foundation has already been laid. The timing has already been approved. The keys have already been released. The only question that remains is not times, if times, the move will happen, but whether you will walk through the door when it opens, because the house is ready. The season has shifted, and the move has been decided. December 27th, 2025 is not presented as an ordinary moment on the calendar. It stands as a line drawn by heaven, a point where time and purpose intersect. Throughout Scripture, God marks certain days not because of what people see on the surface, but because of what has already been determined in the unseen realm. These moments function as thresholds, points of crossing, where one season closes and another begins. They are not random, and they are never accidental. When such a day arrives, it carries with it the weight of decision, fulfillment, and transition. In the ancient pattern, God often tied destiny to specific times. The flood had an appointed day. The Exodus had an appointed night. The crossing of the Jordan happened at an appointed season. Even the rebuilding of what was broken was linked to appointed years and cycles. These moments were not chosen by people, they were revealed to them. In the same way, this date is framed not as something to be feared or speculated over, but as something to be recognized. A threshold is not about what ends alone, it is about what begins on the other side. A threshold separates familiar ground from promised ground. It is the space between what was known and what must now be trusted. That is why thresholds often feel unsettling. They create tension. They expose hesitation. They force a decision. You cannot stand in a doorway forever. At some point, you must either step forward or turn back. And heaven never marks a threshold without also providing the grace to cross it. This moment speaks of a shift that has been forming quietly, often unnoticed. Long before the date appears in the natural, the movement begins in the spiritual. Thoughts change, desires shift. Restlessness grows. What once satisfied no longer does. The old rhythms begin to feel out of place. This is not confusion, it is preparation. God always prepares the heart before he changes the ground beneath the feet. When a threshold arrives, it does not announce itself with noise alone. Sometimes it comes with silence, with a deep inner knowing that something has changed even if circumstances look the same. It is the awareness that delay is no longer safe, that remaining where you are will cost more than moving forward. This is the nature of a divine threshold. It makes standing still impossible. Such moments also bring clarity. What was once blurred becomes defined. Priorities realign. Certain doors lose their attraction, while others draw the heart without explanation. This is because thresholds refine vision. They strip away distraction and bring focus to what truly matters. What belongs to the next season begins to call, even before it can be fully seen. A threshold is not about pressure, it is about permission. Permission to leave what has expired. Permission to step into what has been prepared. Heaven does not rush these moments, but neither does it delay them once the time has come. When the threshold is reached, the invitation is extended, and the responsibility to respond becomes personal. December 27th, 2025 is portrayed as such a moment, a point of alignment where past preparation meets future fulfillment. It is not the beginning of chaos, but the beginning of order. Not the start of loss, but the unveiling of purpose. The date matters because it represents timing, and timing is everything in the ways of God. What stands before a threshold is not asked to understand everything, but to trust the one who marked the moment. Because every threshold God establishes leads somewhere intentional. It leads forward. It leads deeper. And it leads into what was always meant to be. There are moments when people believe they are waiting on heaven, when in reality, heaven has already moved. The uncertainty is not in the decision above, but in the readiness below. The message of this moment is not about possibilities or probabilities. It is about certainty. The move has already been decided. Long before circumstances begin to rearrange themselves, a decree is established. What unfolds in time is simply the outworking of what has already been said. In the pattern of Scripture, God never reacts. He initiates. When deliverance came to Israel, it was not because the situation suddenly worsened. It was because the appointed time had arrived. When the people were released from exile, it was not because they became stronger overnight. It was because the words spoken generations earlier reached fulfillment. The decision preceded the manifestation. The move was settled before the journey began. This is why striving cannot create what only obedience can enter. If the move depended on effort alone, exhaustion would be the result. But when the move is decided by God, effort gives way to alignment. Doors open not because they are forced, but because the locks have already been removed. Resistance loses its power when timing takes authority. Many struggle in this season because they are treating a settled matter as if it were still under negotiation. They pray for clarity when clarity has already been given. They wait for signs when the signal has already been released. The unease they feel is not a warning to stop. It is a reminder that the window is open and movement is required. When heaven decides, it does not always explain. Explanation often comes after obedience, not before it. This is the test of faith at every turning point. Abraham was not told the full map, only that the destination existed. The people at the edge of the Jordan were not shown the details of conquest, only that the land was theirs. The decision was already made. Their role was to step into it. A decided move also means that opposition, while real, is no longer decisive. Resistance may still appear, but it cannot cancel what has been authorized. Storms may rise, but storms do not determine direction, calling does. When the move is decided, obstacles become instruments of refinement rather than signs of failure. This understanding changes how delays are interpreted. Delays do not mean denial. Often they are evidence of precision. God does not rush what must last, and He does not abandon what He has approved. Even pauses serve purpose. They allow strength to catch up with calling and character to mature alongside destiny. There is also responsibility in a decided move. Once something is settled in heaven, neutrality is no longer safe. To stay where you are when the move has been decided is to resist alignment. Comfort becomes dangerous when it competes with obedience. Familiarity can become the greatest enemy of forward motion. The assurance here is not that the path will be effortless, but that it will be meaningful. A decided move carries provision within it. What is required will meet you along the way, not before you start. This is why fear must be confronted. Fear thrives on uncertainty, but certainty dismantles fear. When you know the move is decided, courage becomes a response rather than a struggle. This season is not about asking whether it is time. The question has already been answered. It is about recognizing that the shift you sense is not imagination, and the pull you feel is not coincidence. They are the echoes of a decision already made. What remains is simple but weighty: to trust the decision, to align with it, and to move when movement is required. Because when heaven decides, delay only postpones joy, and obedience becomes the doorway into what has already been prepared. Throughout the biblical narrative, a house is never merely a physical structure. It represents identity, authority, continuity, and inheritance. When a house changes, everything connected to it changes as well. Names shift, roles expand, and responsibility increases. This is why the promise of a new house carries such weight. It speaks not only of where one lives, but of who one becomes. In the ancient world, to be given a house was to be given a future. A house carried a name, a legacy, and a place in history. When God promised to establish a house, it meant stability where there had been uncertainty, and purpose where there had been wandering. This is why the idea of stepping into a new house always marked a turning point. It signaled elevation, but also accountability. A new house means a new level of authority. Authority is not given for comfort, it is given for stewardship. When someone is entrusted with more, they are also entrusted with greater responsibility. This is why transition often feels heavy before it feels joyful. The weight is not punishment, it is preparation. The structure must be able to support what is coming. At the same time, a new house speaks of belonging. Many remain unsettled not because they lack ability, but because they have been living outside their assigned place. When alignment comes, there is rest even in the midst of challenge. The house fits. The space makes sense. The calling resonates. This sense of belonging is not emotional alone, it is spiritual. It confirms that the transition was necessary. However, no one enters a new house carrying everything from the old one. There is always a leaving behind. Old labels, old limitations, and old compromises cannot coexist with new authority. What was once tolerated becomes incompatible. This is not rejection of the past. It is refinement for the future. In Scripture, when people entered houses of promise, they faced new kinds of battles. David faced resistance after being established. Solomon faced responsibility after receiving peace. Increase did not eliminate challenge, it redefined it. But with the new battles came new grace. Authority expanded in proportion to responsibility. A new house also changes perspective. From a higher place, you see further. Decisions are no longer made only for survival, but for impact. The focus shifts from personal preservation to generational influence. This is why a new house often brings clarity about purpose. It reveals why the journey was necessary and why the delays were not wasted. There is also an element of permanence in a house. Tents are temporary. Houses are meant to endure. Stepping into a new house signals that a season of constant movement is ending. Roots begin to form. Structure is established. What is built now is meant to last, not just serve a moment. Yet permanence does not mean stagnation. It means stability from which growth can occur. A house provides a base. From it, influence extends outward. This is why the transition is significant. It is not just about arrival. It is about expansion. Ultimately, the promise of a new house is a promise of transformation. It declares that the past no longer defines the future, and that what lies ahead requires a new framework. Identity, authority, and purpose converge in this moment. To step into a new house is to accept a new calling. It is to agree with the elevation, embrace the responsibility, and walk in the authority that comes with alignment. The house is not given because one is perfect, but because the time has come, and once entered, nothing remains the same. Shaking is often misunderstood. When stability is disrupted, the natural assumption is that something is being destroyed. Yet in the ways of God, shaking is rarely about loss. It is about transition. Before anything moves forward, it must be loosened from what holds it in place. What feels like instability is often the evidence that movement has already begun. Throughout Scripture, moments of advancement were preceded by shaking. Before deliverance came, the ground trembled. Before new territory was claimed, familiar ground became uncomfortable. This pattern reveals a principle. God does not relocate what is firmly attached to the old season. Shaking breaks the attachments that no longer serve the future. Many mistake shaking for opposition. They interpret disruption as attack rather than instruction. But not every battle is meant to be fought. Some are meant to signal departure. When peace lifts from a place that once felt secure, it is not abandonment, it is guidance. God often removes comfort before He reveals direction, because comfort can delay obedience. Shaking exposes what was hidden beneath the surface. It reveals where trust was misplaced and where identity became tied to the wrong foundation. When things begin to tremble, what cannot be shaken remains. This is not to humiliate, but to clarify. It shows what belongs to the next season and what must remain behind. This is why relationships, routines, and expectations may shift without clear explanation. What once fit no longer aligns. Conversations change. Desires fade. Opportunities close. None of this happens randomly. It is the process of relocation, even when the destination has not yet been fully revealed. There is mercy in shaking. Without it, people would remain in places long after grace has expired. Shaking interrupts stagnation. It prevents settling in environments that limit growth. It pushes movement when willpower alone would choose familiarity over obedience. At the same time, shaking requires discernment. Not every disturbance is to be resisted. Some are invitations to reassess direction. The question is not, why is this happening? But what is this making impossible to ignore? Often the answer reveals the next step. Shaking also prepares the heart for change. It loosens emotional attachments and resets expectations. When the old structure no longer feels secure, the heart becomes open to what is new. This is essential, because transition without inner preparation leads to fear. Shaking prepares the interior so that movement does not overwhelm the soul. It is important to recognize that shaking does not mean failure. It often occurs precisely because growth has occurred. What once worked cannot support what is now required. The foundation must change to accommodate the next level. This is not regression, it is advancement. There is also a time limit to shaking. It is not meant to be permanent. Its purpose is to initiate movement, not to create anxiety. Once the transition begins, the shaking gives way to settling. The restlessness fades as alignment increases. For those experiencing this season, the invitation is not to cling tighter to what is slipping, but to release what is being removed. Resistance prolongs discomfort. Trust accelerates transition. What is leaving was not meant to travel forward. In the end, shaking is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something is changing. The ground is shifting because the direction is shifting. What feels like an ending is actually the clearing of space. And when the shaking has accomplished its work, what remains is ready to move into what has been prepared. Every transition into something new carries a requirement. What belonged to the former season cannot be carried into the next. This is not because the past was wrong, but because it was limited to its time. When a new house is prepared, it demands a new way of thinking, seeing, and responding. Old mindsets may have protected survival, but they cannot sustain growth. In every biblical shift, there was a clear moment of separation. The people who left Egypt could not carry Egypt within them into the land of promise. The wilderness exposed mentalities that were incompatible with inheritance. Fear, complaint, and dependence on the familiar became barriers, not because they were unforgivable, but because they were unsuitable for what lay ahead. Mindsets shape capacity. What you believe determines what you can receive. A new season often requires a larger internal framework. Without transformation of thought, external change becomes overwhelming. This is why resistance often arises not from circumstance, but from perception. The challenge is not the new house, it is the old thinking trying to occupy it. Fear is one of the first mindsets that must be confronted. Fear speaks the language of the past. It remembers losses more vividly than victories. It measures the future by previous disappointments. But fear cannot govern a space designed for authority. A new house requires confidence rooted in trust, not caution rooted in memory. Another mindset that must be released is compromise. What was once tolerated in hidden places becomes visible under increased responsibility. Elevation brings exposure. Small allowances that once seemed harmless now weaken structure. Integrity becomes essential, not optional. The higher the calling, the more precise the alignment must be. There is also the mindset of self-definition that must change. Many remain bound to labels formed in earlier seasons, roles, failures, or expectations that no longer apply. A new house redefines identity. It speaks a new name over the occupant. To carry an outdated identity into a new calling creates internal conflict. Alignment requires agreement with what the new season declares. Comparison is another weight that cannot be carried forward. Looking sideways distracts from the assignment ahead. Each house is designed differently. What works for one will not sustain another. The new season demands focus, not measurement against others. Comparison belongs to insecurity, and insecurity cannot manage responsibility. Letting go of old mindsets is not an act of denial, it is an act of preparation. It clears internal space. It creates readiness. Without this release, the new house becomes uncomfortable rather than empowering. What was meant to elevate begins to strain, simply because the internal framework has not caught up with the external change. Transformation of mindset does not happen instantly. It is a process of recognition and surrender. Each thought that surfaces must be weighed against the demands of the new season. Does it align or does it limit? Does it strengthen or does it weaken? This discernment becomes a daily practice during transition. The promise is that as old mindsets fall away, clarity increases. Peace replaces confusion. Confidence grows. The new environment begins to feel natural rather than foreign. What once intimidated now inspires stewardship. Ultimately, leaving behind old thinking is not about loss, it is about freedom. It frees the heart from patterns that no longer serve purpose. It frees vision from boundaries that were never meant to last. And it prepares the way for full occupation of what has been given. A new house cannot be entered with an old mindset, not because the house rejects it, but because the future requires more. And when the mind aligns with the moment, the transition becomes not only possible, but powerful. What is ahead is not something being created in haste or assembled at the last moment. It has already been prepared. Long before the invitation was felt, provision was arranged. This is the nature of divine inheritance. It exists before it is entered. What appears sudden in time has been established through intention. Throughout Scripture, those who stepped into new territory often discovered that what they needed was already there. They encountered resources they did not produce and structures they did not build. This reveals a pattern of grace. Inheritance is not earned through striving, it is received through alignment. Effort may be required to occupy it, but effort is never what creates it. Prepared inheritance carries assurance. It means the season ahead is not fragile or uncertain. The foundation has been laid. The timing has been approved. What remains is the act of stepping forward. This requires obedience, not perfection. Obedience responds to what has been provided rather than waiting for ideal conditions. Many hesitate at this point, not because they doubt the promise, but because they underestimate readiness. They look at themselves instead of the preparation. But readiness is not measured by feeling qualified, it is measured by being called. When the door opens, it does so because the time is right, not because confidence is complete. Obedience is often misunderstood as pressure, but it is actually an invitation into rest. When one moves in alignment, resistance loses power. Effort becomes focused. Energy is no longer wasted on maintaining what has expired. Instead, it is invested in building what will last. A prepared inheritance also carries responsibility. What is given must be stewarded. This is not ownership in the human sense, but trust. The resources, influence, and authority that come with a new season are meant to serve a purpose beyond self. Stewardship ensures that inheritance multiplies rather than diminishes. This season calls for courage that is rooted in trust. Trust that the preparation is sufficient. Trust that provision will meet obedience. Trust that what unfolds will confirm the step taken. Fear often argues that movement should wait until certainty is complete. But certainty often comes through movement, not before it. There is also a sense of finality in stepping into prepared inheritance. It marks the end of delay. Wandering ceases. Direction becomes clear. While growth continues, the aim is no longer in question. This clarity brings peace even when challenges arise. Prepared inheritance does not eliminate opposition, but it reframes it. Challenges become part of development rather than threats to survival. The focus shifts from preservation to progress. Confidence grows not from absence of difficulty, but from awareness of purpose. Obedient entry requires attentiveness. The door may not remain open indefinitely. Timing matters. Opportunity has seasons. When the moment arrives, response matters more than analysis. Overthinking can delay what decisiveness could secure. The assurance offered is that nothing essential is missing. What is required will be revealed along the way. Strength will rise to meet demand. Wisdom will increase with responsibility. Support will appear when needed. This is the nature of provision that follows obedience. In the end, stepping into prepared inheritance is an act of agreement. It is saying yes to what has already been arranged. It is aligning action with intention. And when that step is taken, the promise transitions from concept to reality. What has been prepared now awaits occupation. The season has shifted. The way has been made. And obedience becomes the final key that opens what was already ready